Imagine an organization that controls $11.5 trillion in assets, which is actually more than the GDP of every country in the world except the US and China. This same company, together with two other firms, owns stakes in 88% of the companies in the S&P 500. And through its Aladdin platform, it processes data on 20% of all global assets. This is Ekaterina Kirberova with you. Here we discuss the economy, and this is Base After Base. In the financial world, there is no name more influential than BlackRock. This quiet, almost invisible company to the average person is part of the trio: BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, who together hold controlling stakes in 88% of the companies in the S&P 500. The S&P 500, for those who don't know, is a stock market index of the 500 largest companies in the world. It includes everyone, from Apple and Microsoft to Bank of America and Netflix. BlackRock has a decisive voice in management, determining the fate of corporations and even entire countries. And this isn't the plot of a dystopia, this is the reality of 2025. BlackRock has become so big that it now sets the rules of the game itself. When it says jump, corporations and governments around the world only ask, how high? We don't just manage money, we shape the future, declares Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock. Larry was born in 1952 to the family of a shoe store owner in Los Angeles. Unlike many billionaires, Fink does not come from a dynasty of world rulers, although his family was well off. He distinguished himself even as a young man. And after graduating from the University of California, Los Angeles, where he studied political science, Larry burst into First Boston, turning the mortgage bond department into a gold mine. By the age of 31, he had become the bank's vice president, earning $3 million a year. But in 1986, the young trader Larry Fink made a mistake that nearly cost him his career. His prediction about interest rates turned out to be catastrophically wrong, causing First Boston a loss of $100 million. But Fink managed to turn failure into the foundation of his empire. I realized that risk is not the enemy, but a tool that needs to be studied, he recalled. In 1988, joining forces with 7 colleagues, Fink founded BlackRock in a rented apartment in Manhattan. Their first mission was to turn risk into a science. Their first major client, General Electric, entrusted them with $1 billion in bonds. By 1994, the assets under their management had grown to $53 billion. But the real leap happened between 2006 and 2009. This included the acquisition of Merrill Lynch Investment Managers for $9.6 billion and Barclays Global Investors for $13.5 billion. This turned BlackRock into a giant. The takeover of iShares was especially significant. This is an ETF platform that today controls 40% of the global exchange-traded funds market. Let me tell you right away what ETF is. It's like a basket with different stocks that is sold on the exchange as a single security. Imagine that you want to buy not just one specific stock, like only Gazprom or Apple, but instead a share of many companies at once. So you don't put, all your eggs in one basket and can diversify your risks. Previously, to do this, you had to buy each stock separately, spending a lot of money and time. But an ETF is a ready-made set of stocks or bonds, gold, and even cryptocurrencies, all bundled into one package. So how does it work? Let's say there's an ETF for American IT companies, and inside it are shares of Apple, Microsoft, Google, and other giants. And when you buy one share of such an ETF, you automatically become a mini owner of all these companies at once. If their stocks go up, the price of the ETF goes up as well. If they go down, your ETF also loses value. And let's say a couple more words about why ETFs are convenient for buyers. First of all, it's cheap. Buying one share of Tesla costs $100, but a share of an ETF that includes Tesla can cost as little as, a cup of coffee. Secondly, it's simply you don't have to understand every single company. You buy an ETF and instantly own a piece of an entire sector of the economy. It's accessible. ETFs are traded on the exchange just like regular stocks, and you can buy them through any broker in just a couple of clicks. And the convenience for sellers usually lies in the fact that the fund contains a mix of different securities. Some sell better, others worse, but the buyer can't refuse them. They buy the whole package. And of course, the seller adds less liquid stocks to the more liquid ones. It's like when you get a combo at McDonald's and they add, carrot sticks, even if you don't like them. This is the kind of ETF platform that BlackRock acquired. Fink's comrades are next to him. Robert Capito, BlackRock's co-founder, spent decades strengthening ties with government agencies, turning the company into an informal advisor to the administration. And Susan Wagner, after leaving the board of directors, remained within the sphere of influence, participating in initiatives where public and private interests intersect. Her career is a prime example of how BlackRock's influence endures across generations. BlackRock is truly a master at using the revolving door. Let's take, for example, Mark Wisdall. He is a former official of the US Treasury Department. Now he heads the company's international business, drawing on his experience in developing financial policy. Or Dalai Blanc, who worked at the European Commission on Sustainable Development. And Brian Deese moves from BlackRock to the White House as the head of the National Economic Council. BlackRock's connections extend far beyond the United States. In Europe, the company advises the European Union on climate policy. In Switzerland, its vice chairman, Philipp Hildebrand, a former head of the central bank, lobbies for the interests of the financial sector. In Asia, BlackRock works closely with sovereign funds like Saudi Arabia's PIF, turning geopolitics into an investment tool. If the story of BlackRock's relationship with the US authorities were the plot of a Hollywood movie, critics would call it too unrealistic. But this is not fiction, it's reality, where the world's largest investment company has played the role of shadow finance minister for the wealthiest countries around the globe for decades. Of course, it gains access to state secrets, multi-billion-dollar contracts, and influence over the global economy. Remember the crisis of 2008 when Lehman Brothers collapsed and the US financial system was on the verge of collapse? At that time, the Federal Reserve was frantically searching for someone who could sort out the piles of toxic assets, and they chose BlackRock, the very company that, among other things, actually specialized in those very assets. BlackRock didn't even participate in a tender. They were simply appointed as the main asset manager for $130 billion, including the bonds of Bear Stearns and AIG. Critics were quick to point out that BlackRock, managing the assets of competitors while simultaneously advising the Federal Reserve, was sitting on two chairs at once. They put it this way: they're treating the patient, knowing that later they'll buy his organs. And the case with Bear Stearns became a kind of symbol. BlackRock helped assess the bank's assets and later took part in purchasing them. The firm gained unprecedented access to the inner workings of the Federal Reserve. And the Aladdin Platform became the brain behind the anti-crisis operations. And 12 years later, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the Federal Reserve called on BlackRock again. This time, it was to manage as much as $750 billion as part of the economic rescue program. The company was given the authority to buy corporate bonds, deciding which companies would receive money and which would not. And again, there were no tenders. BlackRock simply took control of a key financial lever of the United States. You could even say of the entire global economy. Moreover, it immediately began investing in the same assets through its own funds, in other words, engaging in insider trading and earning billions. People said it was a cartel conspiracy, but no investigations followed. I've already mentioned the Aladdin Platform. That's another BlackRock asset. Let's talk about it in more detail. Aladdin analyzes 100 million financial instruments every day. Its algorithms predict risks, advise selling stocks and buying bonds. And its clients are everything from pension funds to central banks all over the world. And everyone depends on its forecasts. Aladdin is in fact a weapon of mass financial destruction. If it falters, the whole world will tremble. For example, there was a major technical failure in 2012. At that time, the Aladdin system was paralyzed due to a software update failure, which affected trading and risk management operations for both BlackRock's internal and external clients. Clients were unable to access the system's key functions for 2 days. BlackRock fixed everything, but of course no one got back the billions of dollars that disappeared. And although the market eventually returned to stability, this incident revealed a troubling fact. If something goes wrong with Aladdin, the global economy could collapse along with it. And this concern is not unfounded. Aladdin is no longer just a tool. It's a monster that is embedded at the core of the global financial system. Its tentacles hold pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and even central banks. And BlackRock expands Aladdin's influence year after year. It not only analyzes risks, but also shapes market trends. For example, during the coronavirus epidemic of 2020, when the Federal Reserve needed help managing the emergency economic rescue plan, it chose BlackRock as its partner. The Aladdin company became the organizer of this large-scale intervention, deciding which companies would receive financial support and which industries would be prioritized for rescue. And the greater Aladdin's power becomes, the more often critics point out that the system lacks transparency and no one fully understands its inner workings. Even the executives at BlackRock cannot explain the logic behind every decision. And what's even worse, Aladdin's success depends on the assumption that historical data can accurately predict the future. But honestly, in a rapidly changing world, that well, just doesn't work. And of course, technology itself is neither good nor evil. What matters is something else. What matters is who uses it and whose hands it is in. And it is used by the largest private corporation in the world. Today, BlackRock owns stakes in 1 out of every 5 banks in the world. Its 7.5% share in JP Morgan Chase is a lever of influence worth $30 billion. At shareholder meetings, BlackRock's vote determines development strategies and the fate of directors. How did it happen that banks, including central banks, sold voting shares to BlackRock? The fact is, BlackRock is the largest asset manager in the world. When an investor puts money into iShares Score, those same as P500 ETFs, BlackRock automatically buys shares of JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citigroup, because they are included in the index. That's how it accumulates huge holdings without active management. For example, in JP Morgan Chase, BlackRock owns, as I already mentioned, 7.5% of the shares. It is the largest shareholder. In Bank of America, it's 6.8%. That's the second largest shareholder after Vanguard. In Citigroup, it's 8.3%, also making it one of the top 3 shareholders. These stakes make BlackRock a key voting player at shareholder meetings. And why can't the banks get rid of BlackRock? Because this company doesn't pick stocks, it simply copies the index. The banks can't remove themselves from the S&P 500, otherwise their shares would collapse. And the more people invest in ETFs, the more BlackRock buys bank shares. And so it creates a vicious circle, there's no way out of it. BlackRock uses its stakes to influence the appointment of directors, dividends, and even the bank's environmental strategies. So it's not that easy to get rid of them. In addition to ETFs, BlackRock manages the pension savings of millions of people through, for example, private pensions and government pension funds. If you thought that the money in pension funds just sits there waiting for its time to kumeno, that's not the case. It's invested in the same ETFs and bank stocks. Now imagine that, for example, after the release of another Depsica, the shares of leading companies turn into pumpkins, and along with them, the pension savings of millions of citizens vanish. In the US, BlackRock is a titan among titans. At Bank of America, where it owns 6% of the shares, it doesn't just vote at meetings, it sets the agenda. For example, in 2021, when the bank was deciding whether to keep the controversial director Brian Moynihan, BlackRock's vote was decisive. And at Wells Fargo, entangled in investigations over client account fraud, BlackRock holds 5.5%. In Europe, BlackRock operates more subtly. At Deutsche Bank, which has lost half its value in recent years, its 5% stake is not just an investment, it's a bet on control. At HSBC, where its share is approaching 6%, BlackRock supports the cost-cutting strategy. In Asia, BlackRock is playing the long game. At Mitsubishi UFJ, Japan's largest bank, its 5% stake serves as a springboard for entering Asian markets. In short, BlackRock doesn't just hold shares, it actively uses them. At shareholder meetings, its vote can bury a reform or push through some climate initiative. By the way, they are constantly involved in climate issues. In 2023, it supported 97% of ESG proposals, that is, those related to sustainable development, the environment, and so on in banks, turning environmental issues into a tool of influence. But the more power BlackRock has, the more questions arise. Why does it own stakes in competing banks? How do ETFs, which are supposed to be passive, suddenly influence strategies? And in 2021, Reuters revealed that BlackRock does not disclose voting data for 40% of its shares. Well, it's a private company, it does whatever it wants. So what questions could there be? Isn't that right? In 2016, BlackRock made a deal that caused even the halls of Congress to buzz with whispers. Managing the pension funds of CIA employees? Now they know where the spies live, skeptics joked. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morrell joined BlackRock's board of directors and turned the company into a bridge between intelligence and finance. We don't just invest, we anticipate, say people at BlackRock, analyzing data that remains a secret to others. And when USAID launched a program to develop agriculture in Africa, BlackRock was there not with donations, but with cold calculation. Its funds invested in infrastructure projects, turning humanitarian aid into long-term assets. And in Asia, where USAID is fighting terrorism, BlackRock quietly buys stakes in energy companies, once again turning policy into a portfolio. By the way, regarding USAID's policies, we've released an entire video about them on closed platforms. And yes, don't forget to subscribe. It's the only source of funding for our project. For just 400 rubles a month, you'll find a wealth of useful and interesting materials there, and you can even suggest a video on your own topic. So back to USAID. In 2014, a scandal broke out in Kenya. There, doctors discovered that the tetanus vaccine, which was being distributed with the support of USAID and the WHO, contained the HCV antigen, which caused infertility in women. An investigation was conducted at the time, and it revealed that this program was part of a covert campaign to reduce birth rates in developing countries. But this is not the only case. In Nigeria in the 1990s, USAID funded pharmaceutical trials of cadaveric meclizine on pregnant women without their consent, which also led to mass miscarriages. In Tanzania, contraceptives with elevated hormone doses were distributed under the guise of medical aid, causing severe side effects. And in Bolivia, USAID operated under the cover of poverty alleviation programs, but in reality financed opposition groups to destabilize Evo Morales' government. In 2019, he was overthrown with the support of American NGOs. In short, USAID has long used aid as a tool of influence, and BlackRock profits economically from this. After the 2010 earthquake, USAID invested millions in the reconstruction of Haiti, but instead of supporting local farmers, they brought in Monsanto's GMO seeds. That's a BlackRock partner. The result? Traditional crops were displaced. Farmers ended up trapped in debt for seeds and fertilizers, while BlackRock, through agricultural investment funds, bought up land for commercial projects. In Kenya and Nigeria, USAID funded vaccination programs. But at the same time, BlackRock was investing in pharmaceutical companies that supplied the drugs. And when scandals broke out over sterilizing vaccines, BlackRock had already bet on their competitors, profiting from the panic. In Bolivia and Ecuador, USAID pressured the government, demanding the privatization of resources, while BlackRock, through its subsidiary funds, was buying up lithium, the key metal, for batteries, water resources, and energy assets. And when Morales was overthrown in Bolivia in 2019, the shares of lithium companies soared, and who was among the main beneficiaries? BlackRock. So the business model turns out to be like this. USAID creates crazy sanctions, reforms, coups, all that. Then BlackRock buys up assets in falling markets. And after that, partner corporations, the same Monsanto, Pfizer, and energy giants secure their monopoly positions in those markets. This is not some conspiracy theory. It's simply capitalism too. That's how it is. At BlackRock's offices, they know wars bring not only destruction, but also profit. The company owns 6% of Lockheed Martin. This is a giant whose F-35 fighter jets cost $100 million each. The iShares ETF holds shares in Raytheon, whose missiles periodically bomb various countries, and in Northrop Grumman, which builds the bombers of the future. But even more cleverly, BlackRock manages the military pension funds. $120 billion are invested in the very same companies that produce weapons for conflicts. A soldier risking his life in a combat zone has no idea that his future pension is growing thanks to the very missiles he launches. It's like playing poker with your opponent's money. In 2023, when Lockheed Martin received the $40 billion contract to supply F-35 fighter jets to Europe, the company's shares soared by 12%. But the real winner was behind the scenes. BlackRock, which owns 6% of the military-industrial giant, increased its stake in the deal by $2.4 billion. This is not just an investment. It is the very essence of BlackRock's power, whose $11.5 trillion under management turns it into a titan, whose decisions shape not only markets, but also wars. And while the world watches military conflicts here and there, BlackRock quietly restructures its portfolios. Its iShares ETF, which includes shares of Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics, has grown by 18% since 2022. Raytheon, which manufactures Javelin missiles supplied to the Ukrainian armed forces, received $7 billion in investments from BlackRock. In 2020, BlackRock won a Pentagon tender to analyze risks. Its platform Aladdin, which calculates scenarios for traders, was now assessing the risks of military operations. They see war as a matrix of data. And in 2022, the company's vice chairman, Philipp Hildebrand, former head of the Swiss Central Bank, was advising NATO on sanctions. What were his recommendations? Invest in defense. This is the new gold standard. iShares, which tracks the S&P 500 index, automatically includes shares of companies producing cluster bombs and kamikaze drones. An investor buying an ETF for retirement has no idea they're financing conflicts. We're just following the market. BlackRock excuses itself, while its funds receive $5 billion in dividends from defense contractors every year. And by the way, the company doesn't even try to hide its interest. In 2021, its lobbyists spent $2.3 million to block a bill that would ban investments in weapons. And to understand just how deeply corporate tentacles have penetrated individual countries, let's take Israel as an example. On the shores of the Mediterranean, where startups grow like palm trees and cybersecurity is a national sport, BlackRock has struck gold. The company essentially determines the fate and dictates the policy of this Middle Eastern country. In 2023, BlackRock increased its stake in Checkpoint Software Technologies to 5%. That is, now it's $500 million. But this is not just business. Checkpoint protects Israeli banks from cyber attacks and BlackRock from collapse. And in Wix.com, where websites are created for millions of small businesses, BlackRock owns almost 5%. But its true interest lies in data. Every click on Wix is information for Aladdin. Teva Pharmaceutical, the largest producer of generics, received $800 million in investments from BlackRock. Bank Hapoalim, the second largest bank in Israel, entrusted BlackRock with the management of $15 billion. These are not just numbers, these are the nerves of the economy. When, in 2023, the bank was laundering money for settlers in the West Bank, BlackRock did not withdraw its funds. We follow the law, not morality, is its policy. In 2020, BlackRock became an advisor to Israel's Ministry of Finance on privatization. Its recommendations were to sell state assets and invest in startups. This is how they are turning Israel into a startup colony of Wall Street. And the former US ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, now consults for BlackRock. Once again, the revolving door. When in 2023, the Israeli company Elbit Systems, which manufactures drones for the military, received the $2 billion contract, its shares rose by 18%. And BlackRock, which owns 3.5% of Elbit, chose not to comment on this. But what if we look at an example not from Israel, but from Ukraine? And there, BlackRock weaves its threads into the country's economy without calling itself an owner. Not through direct investments, but through a labyrinth of funds and shares, where every step is an entire algorithm. And when Ukrainian wheat is loaded at the ports of Odessa, its journey doesn't start with the farmer, but from screens in New York. Through its ETFs and mutual funds, BlackRock controls stakes in giants like Cargill and Louis Dreyfus. These are companies that process 40% of the world's grain. And MHP, the Ukrainian leader in poultry farming, whose shares are in BlackRock's portfolio, turns the chicken farms of Vinnytsia region into numbers on stock market charts. In Donetsk, BlackRock invested $500 million in DTEK. This is an energy giant whose thermal power plants supply half the country. As for Naftogaz, the state gas monopoly, BlackRock does not own any shares. It manages $2 billion worth of bonds. Sovereign funds managed by BlackRock have invested $1 to $2 billion in Ukrainian infrastructure projects. Highways, ports, railways, all of these are figures in reports where war becomes a factor for growth. Let me say a few more words about sovereign funds. They are also an important part of BlackRock's operations. Sovereign funds are like state piggy banks, where countries set aside money for a rainy day or for future generations. And imagine that your income depends heavily on just one thing. For example, you sell oil or gas, and the prices for these resources are constantly fluctuating. Today you earn a lot, but tomorrow almost nothing. To avoid being left empty-handed in tough times, some countries don't spend everything at once, but set aside part of the money in a special fund. Russia does this as well. And this money doesn't just sit idle. It's invested in various assets, shares of large companies, gold, real estate, or foreign currency. That way, the money is not only preserved, but also gradually grows. Well, that's how it looks in theory. Maybe next time we'll take a closer look at how these funds actually work. For now, I'll just mention that sometimes certain countries like the USA can freeze assets for political reasons, as happened with Russia's reserves in 2022. In fact, in 2023, Ukraine signed an agreement with an American financial giant to create the Ukraine Development Fund, which essentially means handing over everything valuable in the country to external management, from black soil to power grids. According to the terms of the deal on coordinating investment efforts, not only privatized, but even nationalized enterprises come under the control of the corporation. Is this the end of the story? There isn't one. Because Larry Fink is no longer just a person, he's a system. And while the world debates whether he's a savior or a threat, BlackRock quietly buys up the future, $1 trillion at a time. Fink is now a Wall Street veteran, and he's convinced we don't own the world, we just help keep it from falling apart. And behind the facade of a respectable investment fund lies a mechanism of unprecedented influence, where trillions of dollars become a tool for controlling entire nations. BlackRock stopped being just a company a long time ago. It's a system where financial flows determine the fate of peoples, and humanitarian crises become sources of super profits. The connection between BlackRock and USAID is not a conspiracy theory. It's a well-oiled scheme where humanitarian missions distribute sterilizing vaccines in Africa or finance coups in Latin America. The company's investment funds are already prepared to buy up devalued assets. By holding major stakes in defense corporations, BlackRock profits from arms supplies while simultaneously managing the pension savings of the very soldiers who use those weapons. Their Aladdin Platform analyzes the risks of military operations, turning human tragedies into the dry numbers of investment reports. Ukrainian grain, Israeli drones, American missiles, all of this becomes part of a giant financial puzzle, where war is just one of the tools for capital growth. In 2024, BlackRock acquires the direct investment fund Global Infrastructure Partners for $12.5 billion. And just recently, a Hong Kong investment fund announced the sale of a 90% stake in the Panama Canal's port infrastructure to BlackRock.
This is something we have been working on with the seller, Hutchison and Van Poa, for some time. But it was a very intense period, about 2 weeks, when they, faced a very poor stock price for a while. After much deliberation, they decided to see how the market would react to the sale of their 44 ports in 32 countries. I mean, 6 of them are located on the Suez Canal. No one has ever mentioned this, or any of the other ports that are nearby. There are 6 just on the Suez Canal alone. But it was only through our company, through the GP company that we acquired last year, that a partnership was established between GP BlackRock and the largest shipping company in the world. Well, that's it. And they also own a port company called TIL. We have the most strategic partnership, I would say, which helps us grow. And thanks to this acquisition, our portfolio will include 100 ports. And we see this as a true milestone and a real opportunity.
The financial empire of BlackRock is built on a paradox. The more chaos there is in the world, the more stable its income becomes. They don't create crises, they make them profitable. They don't start wars, but they profit handsomely from them. They don't govern states directly, but they decide which industries will receive funding and which will be doomed to oblivion. BlackRock is imperialism.